Imagine waking up, grabbing your phone, and seeing the headline every citizen dreads. Your national digital identity database has been breached.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
A total nightmare scenario.
Right, like your tax records, your home address, your ID numbers, all of it is suddenly up for sale in the darkest corners of the internet. And, panic is really the only natural response to that.
Absolutely. You'd feel completely violated.
Exactly. But then, almost before that panic can fully take hold, the government holds this emergency press conference. They parade an 18-year-old in front of the cameras. They declare they've caught the cyber mastermind, the servers are safe, and, you can go back to sleep.
It plays out like a perfectly scripted movie.
Yes.
I mean, the threat is neutralized within 48 hours,
Yeah.
and the institutions get to take this massive victory lap on the evening news.
But the problem is, in the digital underground, a flawlessly executed arrest that wraps up a catastrophic breach in a neat little bow is, well, it's usually the first indicator of a massive cover-up.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
It's always too good to be true.
So today, we are doing a deep dive into the official, polished narrative of the PampaLeaks hack down in Uruguay. We're tearing it down, actually, by looking at leaked internal communications from the real threat actors.
Which is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, we have sworn testimony from those involved and forensic analysis from independent cybersecurity experts. We really want to understand what actually happens when a government prioritizes its public relations over, the security of your personal data.
And, the mechanics of this specific case are fascinating because they expose a universal vulnerability. I mean,
Yeah.
It shows how systemic incompetence is just hidden by manufacturing a villain. It's something everyone should care about no matter where you live.
Right. So let's look at the villain they manufactured. The state swoops in and arrests this 18-year-old kid who goes by the online handle Vlady, or sometimes Uruguayo 1337.
Classic teenager hacker handle right there.
Right. And the official press releases paint him as this apex predator of the internet. They claim he orchestrated a string of highly sophisticated, devastating attacks across critical infrastructure.
We're talking massive targets here.
Huge targets. The National Aviation Authority, Dynacia, the Ministry of Social Development, Mites, and this massive international transport company, Bulavis Turismo.
So the narrative hinges entirely on the public believing that this single teenager possessed the capability to breach multiple, independent, highly secured state and corporate networks simultaneously.
Which is wild. But the timeline of events leading up to this arrest makes that almost impossible to believe, like days before a single database was leaked. Alberto Daniel Hill, who is a highly respected cybersecurity expert, publicly warned that a massive cyber event was about to hit Uruguay.
Wait, he predicted it beforehand.
He did. He had been monitoring threat intelligence feeds, so essentially he's watching the chatter on dark web forums and private Telegram channels, and he didn't just predict the attack, he predicted the government's exact reaction. Yeah, he stated they would instinctively try to sweep the actual vulnerability under the rug and spin the narrative just to protect their image.
And that's exactly what happened.
It really is. It feels like, I don't know, arriving at a bank vault, finding the security door blown off its hinges, and arresting the first teenager you see holding a rock near a broken window.
While ignoring the guys carrying the bags of cash out the back.
Exactly. Completely ignoring the highly organized crime syndicate actively emptying the vault. But I want to push back on the cynicism for a second here.
Sure.
Because investigations do get lucky sometimes.
Right.
Maybe this teenager just got sloppy, left a massive digital footprint, and the police simply did their job well. Why jump straight to assuming a systemic cover-up?
Well, to understand the assumption of a cover-up, we really have to look at the bureaucratic incentives of large institutions when they're in crisis. So, Alberto Daniel Hill refers to a phenomenon he calls the protocol of silence.
The protocol of silence. Sounds ominous.
It is. When an organization, especially a state entity, realizes they have left millions of citizens' data exposed, their primary objective instantly shifts from transparency to self-preservation.
Because the fallout would be massive.
Right. I mean, admitting that you suffered a complex zero-day exploit from a sophisticated nation-state, that's embarrassing. But admitting that you left default admin passwords on a public-facing server, which, let's be honest, is usually the reality that is a career-ending, government-toppling failure.
So they need a distraction fast.
Exactly. They need a scapegoat to absorb the public fury. And the data actually supports this institutional reflex. Uruguay currently holds a score of 9.7 on the Global Secrecy Index.
Out of 10.
Out of 10. That is an alarmingly high metric. It quantifies a culture of protecting institutional reputation above almost all else. Acknowledging a structural failure in their cybersecurity framework is a political disaster, so catching a mastermind provides this illusion of control.
Okay, but if a culture of secrecy dictates they need a scapegoat, they still face a massive practical problem. They need to actually produce a body to parade in front of those cameras.
Right, you can't just arrest no one.
Yeah, how do you conjure a cybercriminal out of thin air if you haven't done the forensic work? Well, according to the media, the police got a tip. They claimed Vlady was caught because a rival, highly sophisticated hacker gang called Ex-Presidents handed him over to the authorities as part of some underground turf war.
Which is a brilliant piece of misdirection, honestly, if you don't understand how the dark web actually operates.
Right, tell us about that.
So in underground illicit markets, reputation is literally the only currency that matters. Threat actors use cryptographic signatures, escrow systems, and long histories of verified forum posts to prove they are who they say they are.
They have a whole system for building trust among thieves.
Exactly. You cannot simply appear out of nowhere and claim to be a major player.
So when independent investigators looked into the Ex-Presidents group,
They found absolutely nothing. Zero history. No PGP keys, no past data dumps, no chatter verifying their existence on major platforms like breach forums or exploit.in.
nothing at all.
Not a trace. The cybersecurity community widely suspects Ex-Presidents is a complete fabrication, just a phantom informant created either by the media or by intelligence services.
The logic there is pretty transparent, though. I mean, if you claim an anonymous, untraceable rival gang handed you the suspect on a silver platter, the public doesn't ask you to present complex digital forensics showing how you tracked them down.
Exactly. You don't have to explain your methodology because your methodology was just, checking your email for a tip.
Wow. And the leaked internal communications from the actual hacker group, PampaLeaks, blow the informant narrative completely out of the water.
Yeah, this part is crazy.
We have raw Telegram logs where a core operator known simply as Pampa is speaking candidly to other hackers. And Pampa explicitly states, and I quote, "The justice system put him in jail for things that I did."
Just blatantly admitting it?
He openly takes credit for the Aviation Authority hack. He claims he did it purely to get attention. He even notes that Vlady was entirely unequipped to handle the blowback from a state-level investigation, but, took the fall regardless.
Which raises the biggest question so far, I think.
Yeah.
If Ex-Presidents is a fake group invented to skip the forensics, and the real hackers are openly admitting Vlady didn't do the heavy lifting, how did the police actually find this specific 18-year-old?
Right. If they didn't trace malicious code back to his machine, what did they do?
Well, they looked for the loudest person in the room. In hacker slang, Vlady was what is known as a lettuce.
A lettuce.
Yeah, a complete novice, green, and more importantly, he was already doxed.
Meaning his real-world identity was completely exposed to the public online.
Precisely. His real name, photographs of his face, and even the car he drove were freely circulating in certain online spheres long before the arrests. So when the pressure mounted to find a suspect, authorities just took the path of least resistance.
Instead of hunting a ghost, they arrested the guy wearing a neon sign. But surely they needed some kind of technical link to justify the arrest warrant, right?
They relied on superficial IP address tracing. Advanced threat actors use proxy chains. They bounce their connection through multiple compromised servers across the globe before ever touching the target network.
So it's untraceable.
Effectively, yeah. The real hackers used highly vulnerable, local servers, like the ones belonging to that transport company, Bukibus, as a middleman to hide their true locations.
Oh, I see. It's like routing your mail through a dozen empty houses. The police didn't follow the trail all the way back to the sender. They just raided the last empty house on the route and arrested the kid standing on the porch.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it. Finding a local IP address interacting with a compromised server is radically different from proving that the person using that IP address is the intellectual author of a massive data extraction.
But in a highly pressurized environment, that superficial link was just enough for them.
It gave them their headline.
So let's look at the technical reality with what Vlady and his associates actually did, because the government threw the book at them with massive cyber terrorism charges. We have testimony from an associate of Vlady's who goes by the handle gob.f, or gob.
And his testimony is super revealing.
It really is. Gob clarifies that they weren't, coding complex zero-day exploits in a basement to smash through firewalls like in the movies. They were using a completely public tool called Intellex, or Intelligence X.
Right. Intelligence X is essentially an open-source intelligence platform. People call it OSINT. It operates as a massive archive. It indexes data, credentials, and documents that have already been breached in previous totally unrelated hacks.
So it's basically a massive internet lost and found box, except nobody checks your ID when you claim a lost wallet.
That's a perfect analogy.
Like, if an employee at a logistics company used the same password for their Netflix account and their government admin portal, and Netflix gets breached in 2018, that password ends up on Intellex. Gob's testimony explains that they simply used this public search engine to find credentials that were already floating around the dark web, and then they fed them into an automated Telegram bot.
They were conducting credential stuffing using historically compromised data, which is bad, but they did not actively breach secure, defended databases like Argentina's National Registry, RENAPER, which the media also tried to pin on them.
Wait, so if the data was already out there, they aren't hackers in the traditional sense. They're scavengers. They are just combing through the wreckage of older, completely different security failures that the government never even bothered to clean up.
The distinction is vital here. They found the keys that careless administrators had dropped on the sidewalk months prior, walked through an unlocked front door, and took a look around. Gob himself admits they performed a defacement of the Buquebus Turismo website. And, defacement is just altering the visual code of a harm page to display a political message or logo.
It's digital graffiti. You spray paint the lobby to prove you got inside.
Right. But Gob is adamant and technically correct that defacing a website's front end requires a completely different, much lower skill set than exfiltrating terabytes of sensitive encrypted back-end databases.
Which is what the government was claiming he did.
Exactly. Gob clarifies that the truly destructive hacks sweeping through the region were executed by a completely different, highly sophisticated syndicate known as Mafia del Gentile, led by a hacker named Rafa. The state simply swept all these distinct crimes into one convenient bucket and just handed it to Vlady.
The international perspective on this makes the government's response look even more disproportionate, actually. Hector, a Mexican cybersecurity commentator who analyzed this case, drew a direct parallel to a situation in Mexico involving a 14-year-old boy known as Axis.
Oh, the Axis case.
Yeah. Axis defaced a government website again, digital graffiti, and instead of treating it as vandalism, the state deployed counterterrorism units to hunt him down, entirely for the optics of looking tough on cybercrime.
It's all about looking strong for the cameras. And Hector also highlights a massive legal black hole regarding the Buquebus hack. The narrative treats this as a local crime. However, the architecture of the internet complicates that significantly.
How so?
Well, Buquebus's web infrastructure is routed through Cloudflare, which acts as a reverse proxy with the actual servers hosted in Canada and on Amazon Web Services in the United States.
Okay, let me make sure I understand the mechanics of that. So Cloudflare acts like a digital bodyguard. If I try to access the Buquebus website, my computer doesn't talk directly to a server sitting in Montevideo. It talks to a Cloudflare server sitting in, say, Toronto or Virginia.
Yes. The traffic hits the content delivery network first.
So legally speaking, the crime scene isn't a server rack in Uruguay. If a kid uses a computer in Montevideo to alter a visual file hosted on a server in Canada, was a crime actually committed on Uruguayan soil?
It raises intense questions about technological sovereignty and international jurisdiction. I mean, did the local prosecutors even have the legal authority to charge him for interacting with foreign-hosted infrastructure without international cooperation?
They just brushed right past that.
Completely. The authorities seemingly ignored the entire architecture of cloud computing just to secure a fast PR victory.
The fallout from that PR victory is really sobering, though. Despite the fact that we are talking about digital graffiti, open source intelligence gathering, and scavenging old passwords, the state brought the hammer down with terrifying force on this kid.
They really did.
Vlady was hit with 6 months of absolute preventive detention. We're talking about an 18-year-old novice thrown into general population, held completely incommunicado from his family.
Preventive detention of that length is generally reserved for severe flight risks or, individuals who pose an immediate violent threat to society.
Not a teenager with an internet connection.
Right. For an 18-year-old with no sophisticated criminal history, it is an extreme escalation.
And the charges he is facing could result in anywhere from 4 to 10 years in prison. They charged him with aggravated data violation, specifically alleging that his actions exposed the personal data of President Yamandu Orsi.
Which suddenly makes it very political.
Exactly. And just to be clear, we are simply analyzing the mechanics of the legal filings here, looking at how high the stakes were raised the moment a political figure's data was involved, without taking any sides on that exposure itself. We're just reporting what's in the document.
Of course. And the most alarming mechanic of this entire prosecution is that Vlady's legal case file, the Expediente, was declared entirely confidential by the state.
I want to pause on that because I know a lot of you listening might be thinking, okay, maybe he wasn't a criminal mastermind. Maybe he just scavenged old passwords and spray painted a website. But he still accessed systems he had no legal right to touch. He broke the law. We need severe consequences to deter people from probing critical infrastructure, even if they are novices.
And that's a fair point. Unauthorized access is a crime, and no credible cybersecurity professional argues that it should be ignored. The issue at the core of this, though, is proportionality and the absolute suspension of due process.
Right.
When a state seals a case file, it means the defense attorney cannot see the digital evidence being used against their client.
You are fighting a boxing match while blindfolded.
Literally. You cannot mount a technical defense against IP logs or server forensics if you are legally barred from reviewing them. It is a severe violation of human rights masquerading as national security.
And Alberto, Daniel Hill, and Hector both point out a brutal irony in all of this. They argue that by using public OSINT tools to log into these systems, Vlady and his associates effectively gave the Uruguayan government and these corporations a free penetration test.
They performed an unsolicited security audit. They eliminated vulnerabilities that had likely been sitting wide open for years.
Just waiting for someone worse to find them.
Exactly. The appropriate secure response would be to patch the vulnerabilities, enforce multi-factor authentication, and secure the perimeter. Instead, the government chose to shoot the messenger and declare the perimeter secure.
Because admitting the lock is still broken ruins the press conference.
Bingo. And this creates a very real danger for the public. By locking up a novice hacktivist and pretending the structural problem is solved, the state leaves the actual vulnerabilities unpatched.
Which is terrifying.
It is. While they are taking victory laps over an 18-year-old, the real threat actors operate with absolute impunity. If you open Telegram right now, it is flooded with thousands of hardened cybercriminals running massive carding rings, stealing and selling credit card data and deploying devastating ransomware against hospitals and infrastructure.
But the state largely ignores them because dismantling a decentralized, heavily funded, internationally distributed ransomware cartel requires deep, complex, multi-year forensic work.
It's incredibly hard work.
It is infinitely easier to arrest the kid who left his name and car model on a public forum.
The path of least resistance provides the illusion of security, while the actual data remains exposed.
So just bringing this all together, we start with a major cyber incident that causes genuine panic. The institutions, terrified of reputational damage and operating under this deeply ingrained culture of secrecy, completely ignore the massive structural failures of their own IT departments.
Yep.
They avoid presenting complex forensic evidence by allegedly inventing a phantom hacker gang to act as a convenient informant. They track down the most inexperienced, highly visible teenager they can find, hit him with crushing charges, and seal the evidence to prevent a defense.
It's wild when you lay it out like that.
And all of this is executed purely to control the narrative and save face.
This case is a masterclass in why digital literacy and skepticism are so essential today. The next time a major cybercrime makes the news and the headline claims the mastermind was caught overnight and the data is perfectly secure.
You need to look past the press conference.
Exactly. The perfection of the official story is almost always the cover-up itself, hiding systemic institutional negligence.
It is entirely about the illusion of safety, which leaves a lingering question for you to consider the next time you type your password into a state or corporate portal. If governments are willing to manipulate digital narratives, invent phantom informants, and completely ignore international criminal syndicates just to protect their own public relations.
Who is actually guarding the vault?
Right. Who is actually standing between your personal digital identity and the dark web? Are you relying on the very institutions that are actively choosing to leave the front door unlocked just so they never have to admit they lost the key?